Welcome to Catch and Go. In today's telecast, we're going to do the title called God's Prophecy Concerning the Liberation of Ukraine. You need to understand that I've been saying for the last several years and back since 2014 to early 2022, the grace of God has been saying that He will liberate the nation of Ukraine. And I want you to understand that there is also coming a global shift. But something happened on July 15, 2025 at 12:55 p.m. Let me first give you the time slot. The first time slot when God spoke was 12:55 p.m. The second slot in which God spoke was at 1:05 p.m. The third slot that God spoke was at 1:10 p.m. And then finally, 2 minutes later, the grace of God spoke at 1:12 p.m. And the glory of God is simply saying there's coming a global shift and a shifting of alliance. And it's time to flex. And the grace of God is concerned when it comes to the U.S. in America and those down in D.C. talking about giving the Russians another 50 days. And God is saying that's enough, because you have seen what Vladimir Putin has been doing for the last 11 years or so, but what he's been doing since the early 2000s. And the grace of God is about to end not only Vladimir Putin, he's got him cornered, the end of Vladimir Putin, but also the end of the Russians, because God said and made it very clear and made it very personal that He Himself will literally destroy Vladimir Putin in the Russians, because what you see shaping up is World War III in the Battle of Ezekiel 38, the Battle of Armageddon. Let's continue. As you have heard me say for the last several years, that the grace of God spoke in this title, God's Prophecy Concerning the Coming Liberation of Ukraine. The Lord spoke at 12:55 p.m. July 15, 2025. And let me explain to you the first slot and what He began to speak and how He moved supernaturally, opened up the window and began to bring divine revelation and laid out this title called God's Prophecy Concerning the Liberation of Ukraine. Remember, it's been now for quite some time, and I believe more than a couple of years, that I had this title ready to release it. But remember, I have said that everything works in God's timeline, but God is releasing God's forecast that what's going to happen is the coming liberation of Ukraine. And the grace of God is simply saying time is up, not only for civilization, the time and the departure of the church, the bride, the born-again believers, the Gentile church, and the glory of God is simply saying to Vladimir Putin, time is up. And God's sending a stern warning to America that God has had enough and we need to stop when it comes to 50 days. God is saying it's time to flex. But on July 15, 2025, it was Tuesday, which basically was yesterday, the Lord, as I'm sitting here and I'm beginning to meditate and I'm writing down and preparing a different message. 12:55 p.m. God opens the window and then supernaturally He starts to lay down this title, God's Prophecy Concerning the Liberation of Ukraine. And I have said that Donald Trump's tariff will cause an escalation when it comes to the global trade war and a one world currency and a one world government and a new world order established and the revived Roman Empire. And the grace of God is making it clear also when it comes to the 10 kings now. And God is saying that there's a global shift, a shifting of the alliance. But then God spoke at 1:05 p.m. That's the second time God spoke. But God opened the window before He spoke. The grace of God opened the window at 1:05 p.m. and the Lord said to me, Ukraine. But before He said Ukraine, the Lord said to me the 11th hour. And then he said to me a few seconds later in the realm of the spirit, the Lord said the word suddenly. Suddenly, they're talking about peace, but suddenly destruction. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And what you're going to see is global war on a total different scale, and what you got in the making also is the shaping, the accelerating, in the prelude, in the sequence of the Ezekiel 38 war, and you need to prepare. And God just said to me that it's time to flex. Not only a moment of flexing, but it's time in which I have said to you, it's been a time in which I've always said, it's a game of chess, and God will score checkmate in this global shifting. I said that God spoke at 1:05 p.m. God spoke at 12:55 p.m. and totally shifted my whole preparation. Can you hear what I'm saying? Can you catch the drift? That God supernaturally, under the inspiration and the inspiring living word of his, and under the inspiring power and not only of his might and glory, opened the window and took the prophet and swung him over to begin to prepare a whole total different message. But God's timing and God's forecast and God's time clock, when God speaks, he also speaks in times and in numbers. I'm going to tell you the 4 slots: 12:55 p.m., 1:05 p.m., 1:10 p.m., and also 2 minutes later at 1:12 p.m. And the glory of God came a third time, and the grace of God spoke not only the third time, but in the second time, when he said finally the word suddenly, when he opened the window and showed me that word in the realm of the spirit. But before that, he spoke and said in the 11th hour, then suddenly, immediately came a third time, not only in the third time at 1:10 p.m. And the Lord said to me, the removal. God is about to remove the shape. There is going to be what the Lord just said to me. This one you circle. It's the first time that the Lord has spoken. Because seconds ago, what did the Lord say? He said it's a time to flex. That the U.S. needs to flex its military might and military power. And understand that the grace of God has been saying to the U.S., shut down the borders and close the airspace. Because there's going to be a time when the enemy will try, but not only attack America from inside and outside. Because inside America, there's not only cell groups. When I talk about cell groups, I'm talking about jihadists. I'm talking about people that are enemies of America, that not only are here for a long time, and they're spread out through all 50 states. And God is putting America on notice that you need to prepare for what I'm going to say and what I'm going to speak concerning the crisis inside America in the coming civil war. Now, in this third time, the Lord said the removal, but then 2 minutes later, the fourth time, the Lord said to me, the grace of God spoke and said a global shift. And then the Lord said to me, Armageddon. When it comes to Vladimir Putin, the grace of God is simply saying, look, this guy has got a stallion mentality. Not only he's been killing civilians, but they are responsible. The Russians are responsible for the MH17 Malaysian Airlines, which totally the Russians are responsible for blowing up that aircraft, that Malaysian airline MH17. And the glory of God said that he's had enough when it comes to Vladimir Putin. Not only he cornered Vladimir Putin, God has said over and over that he's got a stallion mentality, but the glory of God is simply saying that in the Ezekiel 38 war, the Battle of Armageddon, which I said that at 1:12, the Lord came to me and he said, Armageddon. At 1:10, the grace of God comes and say, the removal of the saints. And the Lord is saying to me that the church in the bride need to be prepared to be captured and be taken away in glory in the rapture. Let me take my time because I feel like I'm going a little bit too quick. Let me give you the 4 slots again, and I'm just reinforcing. 12:55 p.m. the Lord moved me and totally shifted me to prepare this message, God's prophecy concerning the liberation of Ukraine. Totally liberated but set free. Remember, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. Remember, I said the city of Kyiv, a city of believers, and the glory of God has seen enough, where Vladimir Putin has been killing not only civilians, not only bombing hospital, bombing children. And the Lord is saying very simple that in God's timeline, God's time clock, God's prophetic time slot, the glory of God is simply saying that he is about to eliminate the Russian president and the Russians. But I said that will happen in the battle of Ezekiel 38, the battle of Armageddon. Now, I want to make this very clear that I forgot to give you the main power text. And it's a scripture that I've been talking over and over for the last 5 years. So the PowerPoint text comes from 2 Chronicles 15, verse number 6. Watch what it says in verse number 6. So nations was destroyed by nations, and city by city, for God troubled them with every adversity. Look, God was the one causing havoc. You see what it says there in the New King James Version when it comes to 2 Chronicles 15. The grace of God has given me specific instruction to read that verse again. It says, and verse number 6 of 2 Chronicles 15. So nations was destroyed by nations, and city by city, for God troubled them with every adversity. And you see that there is not only turmoil, and there is chaos, and there's confusion globally around the world. You see that I said at the opening of this telecast in this title, I said that there's going to be one thing that you and I are going to see, and that is the escalation of global trade war, and God fulfilling not only the 2010 prophecy when I was in Singapore in a place called Pongo. God is fulfilling the mandate of that prophecy, not only in nuclear arm race, nations starting to have nuclear arm. It's a nuclear arm race where you're going to see, when it comes to the advance of technology, it's going to play a major role. And the Lord said also, when it comes to the laser beam, not only countries developing these laser beam, and you're going to see what the Lord said the other day, cyber attacks, not only cyber attack, but you're going to see the blackouts in the power grid. And I'm going to make this very clear in this title, that I got nothing against Vladimir Putin. I got nothing against the Russians. I got nothing against Beijing and President Xi. I said that these two will simply make miscalculated steps. And also when it comes to the Lord showed me the Taiwan Strait in the South China Sea. Now, I want to make this very clear that you need to see prophetically God's prophetic time clock and God's prophetic time slot, but also how God works not only in prophetic numbers and in prophetic time. And I'm going to give you the prophetic time in which God spoke concerning this message. 12:55 p.m. Pay attention to the numbers. 1:05 p.m. Pay attention to the number. 1:10 p.m. Pay attention to the number and the time. 1:12 p.m. Pay attention to the time. And but especially when it comes to the numbers, not only the numbers, but you see there is the number 5. And you see there 55, 12:55. You see the number 12. You see the number 1. And the grace of God is saying, you see the number 10, which is a number of divine order and divine intervention. And the Lord is about to intervene supernaturally. He's going to cause havoc. He's going to cause chaos. He's going to bring the nations and cities where you're going to experience a great deal of adversity, and you're going to see the escalation of global trade war. You're going to see that there's going to be the collapse. I'm going to tell you what, you need to circle this one too. The Lord said the collapse of infrastructure and the collapse of world economy, banks collapsing, consolidating their banks, and you're going to see the one world currency and the global digital currency, but not until the collapse. And then the third step, I said, it's a two-state solution. Now, I want to close with this. It's a short telecast, and I will come back and do the conclusion. You got to see how God spoke. At 12:55, opens the window and totally takes me in a different direction when it comes to preparing a different message. Benny comes at 1:05, and the grace of God begins to speak concerning not only the things that he was about to do, but the glory of God spoke the second time at 1:05 p.m. and the Lord opened the window. The Lord started to say the 11th hour, the establishment, the revived Roman Empire, a one world government, a one world religion, and the establishment of the revived Roman Empire. Then when God opened the window and said the 11th hour, the grace of God began to speak and said and opened up the realm of the Spirit and took me into the realm of the Spirit and said, suddenly. And I told you, 1 Thessalonians 5:3, when they talk peace and safety, suddenly destruction. And then I want to close with this. The grace of God said the third time, the removal, and then the grace of God said the fourth time. He comes back 2 minutes later and he said, global shift. That's the first thing he said. And then he said, Armageddon. And God has been saying to America that it's time to flex, because there is no diplomacy in the 21st century. You're going to see the escalation when it comes to global war, global trade, and the Black Sea. I have said over and over that will turn into a global war. I said that it's not just between the Russians and Ukraine. I said you got NATO, you got the West, you got Western allies, you got the US, you got not only nations over in Europe and the European Union coming against not only the global South, in the Russians, in North Korea, in Iran, not only Iran, but the glory of God said to me for the first time, he said to me, in Iraq, you got Iraq in the picture, because Iraq plays a major picture in the end times when it comes to biblical prophecy and when it comes to the restoring of the Babylonian Empire. But I said that there's a guy over in Turkey, President Erdogan, that his greatest desire is to build the Ottoman Empire. And what you got here is simply a bluff game, a delay game by Vladimir Putin, by President Xi, by Russia and Beijing. And the glory of God is saying to America, it's time to flex. It's time not only to be vigilant, to be alert, but the glory of God has been saying to America, these are alarming moments, and to be alert and watchful and sober and pay attention to what's taking place not only up in the skies, but also what's taking place over when it comes to this airspace in the skies, when it comes to the war between Israel and Iran, but also their enemies, rivalries of the U.S. The glory of God is simply saying and sending a stern warning to not only the Russian president that your time is up, and what's coming is the liberation of the nation of Ukraine. Because I said back in 2020, I said in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and now in 2025, that there is a city called Kyiv, the city of believers. God is about to liberate every single born-again believer, but the entire nation of Ukraine is about to be liberated by the living God. God said supernaturally by his hand, God will supernaturally liberate the nation of Ukraine. I leave it right here in this title, God's prophecy concerning the liberation of Ukraine. And the glory of God is saying to Vladimir Putin, your time is simply up. The Lord is about to deal not only with the Russian president, but with Russia. And the glory of God is going to cause a global escalation when it comes to the Black Sea. But before I said the Black Sea, he opened my eyes, opened the window into the realm of the Spirit, and the grace of God showed me the Arctic. The battle not only is going to also shift over to the Arctic, a major escalation. not only a major collision, but I said President Xi and Vladimir Putin, they will collide when it comes to Western Africa, Eastern Africa, but also when it comes the Arctic. The glory of God wants me to simply say to you that you need to understand these two will collide heads, and there's going to be a major collision when it comes to who dominates the Arctic. But I have said over and over that America not only needs to flex its military might when it comes to the Panama Canal, but also when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, to the South China Sea. And God said to me, he's also putting the nation of India on notice that sooner or later, trust is going to be broken. And I believe that the glory of God is saying, when it comes to the Russian more than likely will break that trust. And that's why I said in part 1 and part 2, why BRICS nations will collapse. And I said that the nations that are BRICS nations and those leaders in the BRICS, they will collide head and BRICS will collapse. I want to make that very clear. And every journalist, every mainstream media, every world leader needs to remember what I just said, that the BRICS nations will simply collapse. I leave it right here. But don't forget what the Lord said concerning the nation of India, that the Russian, more than likely at some point, are going to break trust and they're going to pull away, and more than likely they're going to come and agree and be on the side of China. I leave it right here. May the Lord so richly bless you. Remember to click like, share, subscribe, hit on the bell to receive our latest telecast. And I'll catch you on my next telecast of Catch and Go. God bless.